She handed me the violation notice like it was a death sentence. Remove all poultry within 48 hours or face daily fines of $500. Her lipstick didn't even smudge when she said it. But what Karen didn't know? I once testified for the city when they rewrote the backyard livestock code. She'd picked the wrong coop. My name's Rachel Delaney. I'm 42, a single mom, and I work from home as a freelance copy editor. Most days, I spend my mornings proofreading marketing reports, and my afternoons with my chickens. Yeah, chickens. 3 hens, to be exact. Betty, Noodle, and Clementine. They're not just birds to me. They're routine. They're therapy. They're part of the rhythm that keeps this place, my place, feeling like home. I started the coop after my divorce. The backyard was too quiet. I needed something to care for, something that gave back in its own small way. Every morning, they greet me like clockwork, and every evening, they follow me back to the shed like a little feathered parade. So when the HOA sent that letter, when Karen Leffley, the new HOA president, decided my girls were a violation of neighborhood aesthetic, it wasn't just about chickens. It felt like someone was trying to erase the calm I'd fought hard to build, like they were reaching past the picket fence and pulling apart the life I had just gotten back in order. And I wasn't about to let that happen. Where are you watching from, by the way? And have you ever had to fight for something small that meant everything to you? Stick around, because what started as a squabble over poultry turned into a full-on reckoning. Karen thought she could intimidate me with a clipboard and a city citation. What she didn't realize is I still had the city's zoning department on speed dial, and I was ready to show her exactly who was boss. There's something about the sound of chickens in the morning that tells you everything's okay. Not the loud barnyard kind. Mine don't squawk like roosters or cause a ruckus. Just gentle clucks, soft rustling in the coop, the occasional excited cackle when Betty lays an egg and announces it to the world, like she deserves a parade, which frankly she does. I live in a modest 1-story ranch home in a quiet cul-de-sac, 3 bedrooms, brick exterior, a patch of ivy that refuses to die no matter how often I trim it back. The backyard backs up to a thicket of pine and elm trees, giving me just enough privacy to feel like I live in the country without actually leaving suburbia. Most mornings start the same. I brew my coffee, slip on my boots, and walk outside to the coop. The girls always hear me coming. Betty's the first to cluck, and soon the others start fussing like I'm late for roll call. They know I bring oats and kale scraps. They know I talk to them while they peck around the grass. It's our little routine. The coop itself is small, hand-built. I made it with the help of my daughter Lucy, who was 10 at the time. We painted it robin's egg blue, and wrote their names in big block letters on the nesting box. Betty, Noodle, Clementine. There's a little ramp, a window with chicken-safe mesh, and enough space for them to roam safely. It's the kind of structure that makes you smile just looking at it. It's tidy, it's quiet, and until recently, nobody ever had a problem with it. That's the thing about this neighborhood. It used to be calm. Most of my neighbors are older folks who've lived here since the late. They wave from their porches. They rake leaves in slow motion. On weekends, someone's always grilling. The air smells like cedar mulch and barbecue sauce from April through October. I'd lived here for 6 years before the conflict started, and for 5 of those years, everything was good. The HOA was more of a suggestion than a threat. We had a president named Mike, who mostly focused on fixing potholes and keeping the streetlights working. He was the kind of guy who didn't care what color your shutters were, as long as you weren't parking on your lawn. Back then, Karen Leffley was just another neighbor. She lived 3 houses down, in a tan colonial with a solar fountain in the yard, and 2 very bored-looking poodles. She smiled at Lucy when we trick-or-treated. Dropped off banana bread once. For years she was just background noise, friendly enough, harmless. And then the election happened. Mike retired and moved to Arizona. Karen ran unopposed. It wasn't a dramatic takeover. There was no campaign, no signs stuck in the grass, just a quiet She sent out her first official email with subject line, "A fresh start for our community." I remember opening it while stirring chili on the stove. It was packed with cheerful language about neighborhood beautification, policy alignment, and proactive harmony. At the time, I barely registered it. Lucy was 13 then, starting to pull away from me, spending more time online, more time at friends' houses. We'd already passed that stage where she helped me tend the coop every afternoon. Now it was just me and the hen. And honestly, they were better company than most people. They didn't roll their eyes when I played Fleetwood Mac while we gardened. They didn't need rides to school or want TikTok money. They just clucked, laid eggs, and followed me around like tiny dinosaur shadows. I just finished planting a few tomato vines near the fence when the first sign came. Not from Karen, but from nature. A pair of bluebirds made a nest in the cedar tree out back. They chirped like a wind chime when the breeze hit. Lucy and I watched them from the patio while I made sun tea. It was that kind of spring, warm, slow, full of quiet winds. And the hens were thriving. Betty had hit her stride, an egg every day like clockwork. Clementine had gotten over her broody phase. Noodle, the runt, finally figured out how to use the feeder without knocking it over. Everything felt still. Settled. Like life had finally exhaled. And then came the first HOA newsletter under Karen's watch. It was neatly formatted. Header image of a well-manicured yard. A short letter signed, with care, Karen, and a single line buried near the bottom. Reminder. Per updated HOA guidelines. Backyard livestock including chickens, goats, or similar animals, are not permitted under Article 12C. I remember blinking at the screen. Backyard livestock? I scrolled back up, searched for attachment, checked the link to the updated guidelines. The file had been uploaded just a few days prior. A clean PDF, with fancy formatting and a new logo at the top. Crescent Hollow Community Revitalization Plan. There had never been an Article 12C. I would have remembered. I helped review the bylaws when I moved in. I even had the printed copy 3-hole punched, in a blue binder tucked inside the hallway closet. Still, I didn't panic. At first I figured it was an oversight. Maybe they were referencing a city ordinance that didn't apply. Maybe it was a draft that got published early. I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I sent a short, polite email to Karen. Hi Karen, just wanted to clarify the line about backyard livestock. As far as I know, our existing HOA guidelines didn't prohibit small poultry like hens. And I've had my coop for several years without issue. Let me know if we should chat. Best, Rachel. I didn't hear back for a week. Then I got the violation notice. It came by mail. The envelope was crisp. Too crisp, like it hadn't even bent in the sorting process. My name was typed in bold. The HOA return address stared at me from the corner like it had always been there. Inside was a formal letter on glossy letterhead. New HOA logo at the top. Green ivy wrapped around a picket fence. Underneath Crescent Hollow, a community that cares. Right. The letter began with pleasantries and legal fluff. Then halfway down, as of this notice, you are in violation of Article 12C of the revised Crescent Hollow HOA Code. Livestock and agricultural animals including but not limited to poultry, are prohibited in residential lots, under Section 3, subsection D. You are hereby ordered to remove all chickens and related structures, coop, feed storage, fencing within 48 hours of receipt, or face a fine of $500 per day. There was no signature, just a printed name at the bottom. Karen Leffley, President Crescent Hollow HOA. I stared at the page for a long time. The language was cold, precise, and just vague enough to sound official without being rooted in any truth I could trace. I flipped through my hallway binder that night, the old one with the printed bylaws. It still smelled faintly like printer ink and rubber bands. No Article 12C. No subsection D. In fact, there was a clause in the original rules that specifically allowed non-commercial hobby coops of 3 or fewer hens, provided noise levels remain within acceptable municipal limits. I highlighted it in pink. Then I printed it again twice. One for my files, one for the eventual fight I now knew was coming. The next morning, I saw Karen. She was standing at the far end of the block, clipboard in hand, talking to two board members I barely recognized. New faces. Younger. A man with shiny shoes and a woman with a tablet. They nodded a lot while Karen gestured vaguely toward houses. Toward mine. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, and watched. She didn't wave. Just glanced over, eyes flicking past mine like I wasn't even there. Like I'd already been erased. That's when the friendly tone disappeared. A week later, I got an email, this time through the official HOA channel. It was written in the same overly polite, veiled authority language. Hi Rachel, following up on the livestock notice, please be advised that failure to comply may escalate to legal action. If you'd like assistance relocating the animals, we can recommend humane removal services. Let us know how you'd like to proceed. No greeting, no humanity, just let us know how you'd like to proceed. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked out to the coop and sat on the grass beside it. Betty hopped into my lap like she could feel my mood. I stroked her feathers and listened to Noodle scratch at the ground nearby. Clementine stared at me sideways, blinked once, and went back to pecking at dandelions. They had no idea what was coming. Karen didn't stop there. Over the next 2 weeks, she began her slow campaign, passive-aggressive, perfectly timed and always just out of reach of direct accusation. First, it was the wellness checks. She started walking her dogs past my yard twice a day. The poodles, Daisy and Dash, would bark like they were being stabbed every time they heard the hen. Karen would shake her head, pull out her phone, and make a show of tapping something in her notes app. Then came the newsletter. This time, it had an entire section labeled, Maintaining Community Standards, a friendly reminder. Unusual noises, odors, or unsightly structures, such as sheds, coops, or unapproved fencing, can lower neighborhood value and should be reported immediately. She even included an anonymous hotline. I wasn't stupid, I knew exactly who that was for. Then I noticed the shift in the neighbors. Mrs. Donnelly, who used to ask for eggs every Friday, suddenly stopped making eye contact. Mr. Nguyen, who once helped me haul mulch for the garden, crossed the street when I waved from my car. Even Lucy picked up on it. Did we do something wrong? She asked one night, as we were watering the tomato vines. No, honey, I said. We're just inconvenient now. Karen was working the neighborhood, quietly, like mold in drywall. I started getting notes. Folded sheets of paper with no signature. Slipped under the door. One of them read, "This is a residential community, not a farm. We're trying to raise property value." Another said, "Just follow the rules like the rest of us." It's not personal. But it was personal. Because I'd become the test case. Karen had picked me and my chickens as her first show of force. Her first step in reshaping Crescent Hollow into the glossy uniform neighborhood she had in her Pinterest-addled brain. And every day I didn't remove the coop, the pressure ratcheted. The fines started appearing in my mailbox, one per day. They looked like parking tickets. Official envelopes, bold print. Balance due. There was a line in one letter that chilled me. Continued non-compliance may result in further legal escalation, including liens. Lanes. On my home. For 3 hens that had lived here peacefully for years. That's when I knew this wasn't about chickens. It was about control. Karen wanted to remake the neighborhood in her image. And anyone who didn't fit that image, anyone too quirky, too independent, too real, was a target. And she was counting on me folding early. Quietly. The way people usually do when bullies wear pearls, instead of brass knuckles. But I wasn't built for folding. Not anymore. The daily fines kept coming. Each envelope was more aggressive than the last. The phrasing shifted from reminder to demand, from non-compliance to breach of contract. Within 2 weeks, I had 15 notices stacked on my kitchen table, like unpaid parking tickets, from a town I'd never visited. I'd spoken to the city once, just to double-check that no actual ordinance had changed. The clerk on the phone said the city's animal code hadn't been touched in 3 years. Backyard chickens were still legal, still permitted under zoning. Still allowed, provided noise and cleanliness weren't an issue. Which they weren't. But here's the trick. HOAs don't need the law to be on their side. They just need you to think it is. They weaponize exhaustion, and the worst part. It started working. Neighbors stopped talking to me entirely. Mrs. Donnelly never opened her blinds anymore. The neighbor kids who used to toss grapes over the fence for Betty gone. My daughter Lucy said even her friends at school had started whispering things like, "Why does your mom have farm animals?" I didn't tell her about the lane threat or the letter Karen had tacked to my front door. Final warning. HOA rule violation. Code enforcement will be contacted. It wasn't signed, just the HOA logo and a date. I took it down before Lucy got home. I didn't want her to see me that angry. And yet, despite the public silence, I could feel the private surveillance closing in. Karen's car passed my house 4 times in one afternoon. A drone hovered above the coop for 20 minutes the next day. Just long enough for Noodle to panic and hide under the ramp. Someone sprayed weed killer near my garden beds. The same day my basil died. 3 of the tomato vines curled in on themselves like they'd been poisoned. I started locking the gate. Not because I was afraid, but because I was starting to see this for what it really was. A power grab. Karen wasn't protecting community values, she was shaping them in her image, and her image didn't have room for difference. It didn't have space for a woman healing through chickens, or for a daughter who still helped collect eggs. It didn't have color, or grit, or personality. It had compliance, perfection, control. And then I found the listing. It was late one night. I couldn't sleep, so I poured a glass of wine and opened Zillow. Just a nervous habit, something to reassure myself that my property value hadn't tanked because of some imaginary poultry infestation. But then I saw it. A listing for a house 4 doors down. Newly listed, 2 days ago. Same layout as mine, except this one was described as part of Crescent Hollow's revitalized Phase 2 community initiative. Includes premium covenants and HOA protection against backyard livestock, nuisance plants, and accessory structures. I blinked. That phrasing wasn't just random, it was exactly what Karen had been writing in her newsletters. I pulled the archived listing from that same house when it had sold last, just a year prior. The old version said nothing about revitalization, nothing about covenants, nothing about livestock. Karen was rebranding the neighborhood. And she was using me, my coop, as a villain in her sales pitch. The motive clicked into place. She was laying the groundwork for a real estate overhaul, possibly a deal with a developer. Maybe even trying to rezone part of the street. And any outlier, any feature that made this place feel human instead of staged, had to go. Betty, Noodle, Clementine, the coop. And this wasn't paranoia. The pattern was clear. A retired couple 2 blocks over had removed their handmade swing set after getting repeated safety violation notices. A neighbor across the cul-de-sac had torn out a beautiful pollinator garden after receiving threats about invasive species. And one homeowner, a widow named Elsie, had moved out entirely after Karen cited her bird feeders for encouraging pests. The emails were always polite. The fines always looked official. But the goal was simple: erase what didn't fit. I dug deeper. Karen's husband was a real estate agent. Her sister, a city council subcommittee member. The dots weren't hard to connect once you stopped assuming good faith. I sat at my kitchen table with Lucy asleep down the hall, the hens softly murmuring through the open back door screen, and I felt it hit me. This wasn't just about 3 chickens anymore. This was about the soul of the neighborhood, about the slow, quiet way people like Karen take things. A bench here, a coop there, a garden bed, a porch swing, a family, until all that's left are matching mailboxes and silence. That night, I made a new folder on my desktop, Operation Rooster. Inside it, I placed ANs of the original HOA bylaws, highlighting the allowance for hobby coops. Emails from Karen, AN screenshots of her real estate listings. Printouts from the city animal code website. The drone photos from my security cam. A calendar noting each day she drove by my house. And every single fine notice, sorted by date, each one stamped disputed. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I picked up my phone, called a friend. Her name's Trina. We went to college together. She's now a zoning specialist for the city. She laughed when I told her what was happening, then said, "You have no idea how many people like Karen I've had to shut down." I sent her everything. And then I started building my case. What Karen didn't know, and would never have guessed from the quiet woman with chickens and compost, is that I used to write these kinds of codes for a living. Not bylaws exactly, but the same type of legal language. I was a technical editor for a firm that reviewed zoning documents, utility compliance standards, and agricultural ordinances. My job was to dissect complicated language, track contradictions, and make sure every clause made legal sense. So when Karen sent me a letter full of bluff and bluster, I didn't crumble. I documented. I dissected. I prepared. Trina helped too. She wasn't just a city zoning specialist. She was the zoning specialist for this district. She confirmed in writing that my chickens were 100% legal under municipal code. No ordinance had changed. No recent votes had passed. More importantly, she sent me a scanned copy of a zoning decision from 5 years ago, signed by a city official affirming that hobby coops with 3 or fewer hens were grandfathered into this part of Crescent Hollow. It had my address on it. Stamped. Approved. Filed. I printed 5 copies. Laminated 2. The next document I added to Operation Rooster was even better, a still valid conditional variance letter, signed by the previous HOA president, Mike, the one who'd actually approved my coop when I first moved, buried in HOA records, never rescinded. It was enough to override every single violation Karen had sent. I knew now this was more than a dispute. This was proof of deliberate targeting. But I wasn't done yet. With Trina's help, I filed a formal complaint with the City Housing Board for HOA abuse of power. I attached a complete PDF package of evidence, including all 23 violation notices, a screenshot of Karen's real estate listings that misrepresented HOA authority, a video clip from my backyard security cam showing the drone hovering overhead. Then I contacted my neighbor Elsie, the widow who'd moved away after Karen targeted her bird feeders. She was hesitant at first, said she wanted to forget the whole thing. But once I explained what was happening, she agreed to sign a sworn statement about her harassment experience. That gave me a second victim. A pattern. A voice. Besides mine. Next I pulled public HOA meeting minutes. Karen had rewritten parts of the bylaw code during a closed board session, which according to Section 7 of our HOA's founding charter, was not allowed without a community vote. I highlighted that section in yellow. Then I made copies of the vote records from the last 3 meetings. 0 attendance. No public record of a bylaw change vote. But somehow, new policies had been enforced. It was fraud. Quiet. Administrative fraud. But fraud nonetheless. At this point, Operation Rooster wasn't just a defense file. It was a loaded weapon. The final straw came when Karen posted a community health alert about potential avian-borne pathogens associated with urban poultry. She included a link to a CDC page taken wildly out of context and warned neighbors not to allow their children near unauthorized livestock. That post stayed up for 3 days on the Crescent Hollow message board before someone took it down. But the damage was done, and the timing was perfect. Because I'd just secured a meeting with the HOA board. A public one. And Karen didn't know who else I was bringing. The night of the meeting, I didn't dress up. I wore jeans, a simple blue cardigan, the same boots I wore every morning to feed Betty, Noodle, and Clementine. I wanted them to see exactly who they'd tried to. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, a beige, echoey space, with too many folding chairs and not enough air. Karen sat at the front, flanked by the board members she'd handpicked over the past year. There were maybe 20 neighbors in attendance. Some curious, some skeptical. A few whispered when I walked in. Trina arrived 5 minutes later, wearing her city badge and a calm smile. And then something I hadn't expected happened. 4 more people stood up and walked over to sit behind me. Mrs. Donnelly, Mr. and a couple I didn't know well, Marcus and Shira from the corner lot. They didn't say anything, but they nodded when I looked back. Not everyone had been silent. Some had just been waiting to see if someone would stand up first. When Karen opened the meeting, she skipped right to the agenda. Item 3. Ongoing compliance issues at 408 Pine Hill Drive. She read a summary of my violations aloud, carefully worded, full of terms like hazard, community image, and nuisance structure. Then she turned to me with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Rachel, we'd love to hear your response." I stood, pulled out my folder, laid it on the table, and started speaking. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I simply read from the original bylaws. Something conditional variance, from city zoning approvals, from Karen's own listings. I showed photos. I passed around the laminated code. I read the rules. Their rules that had been ignored. And then I turned to the audience. "I'm not asking you all to love chickens," I said. "I'm asking you to love the truth." I paused, held up a photo of Betty sitting on Lucy's lap. "This is who you've been told is a threat. This is what we've been threatened over." The room went still. Then Trina stood and introduced herself. She confirmed everything, told them on record that the HOA had misrepresented their authority, that bylaws had been altered without community input, and that she'd submitted a report to the city's compliance office. When she finished, Karen tried to interject, but Mr. Nguyen raised his hand. And for the first time in weeks, he looked right at Karen. "I vote to review her position as president," he said. "Effective immediately." The room didn't erupt. There were no cheers, no gasps. Just a silence so tight it felt like the walls had leaned in to listen. Karen blinked. Let's not get ahead of ourselves," she said, smoothing her blouse as if the fabric might save her. "This isn't a formal vote." Trina stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "Actually, it is. Your HOA Charter Section 9B states that any officer's leadership can be subject to review and temporary suspension if at least 30% of present members raise concern in a public meeting." Karen opened her mouth, but Trina was already holding up a printed copy of the rule. Highlighted, stamped, annotated. "Right here," she said, pointing. "And we currently have 23 community members in attendance. That means just 7 votes would be enough to initiate review." I watched Karen's composure crack, just slightly. The corners of her mouth twitched. Her pen tapped her clipboard faster. Mrs. Donnelly raised her hand. "I second the motion," she said. "I've lived here longer than this HOA's existed, and I know bullying when I see it." Then Marcus, from the corner lot. "Third it." Then Mr. Patel, then Shira. Then 3 more hands, 8. Then 9. Karen cleared her throat. I think we need to move on to the next agenda item." "No," said Mr. Nguyen, louder now. "I think we're staying right here." The room held its breath. Karen tried to pass it off with one final grasp. "This meeting isn't legally equipped to make governance decisions." But Trina cut her off. "It is if the bylaws say so. And they do. You've been using bylaws when they suited you, Karen, but you don't get to skip them when they don't." What followed was less a courtroom drama, and more a controlled disassembly. Piece by piece, the narrative Karen had built began to fall apart in full view of her own neighbors. Trina walked them through the unauthorized bylaw changes. I passed around the original charter pages, noting the absence of Article 12C and the illegal addition of enforcement clauses without community vote. Then came the drone photo footage. Still images pulled from my backyard security cam, clearly showing a hovering device circling my coop. The timestamp placed it just days before Karen's health warning post. A neighbor from 2 streets over, one I hadn't spoken to in months, stood and added their voice. "I got a warning letter for leaving my canoe in the side yard," he said. Same language, same threat. I didn't say anything because I figured I was alone. Looks like I wasn't. Then Elsie on speakerphone. Trina played her statement over a Bluetooth speaker at the front table. Elsie's voice gentle but resolved. "I moved because I didn't feel safe. Not from crime, but from my own age. Karen made me feel like I didn't belong in my own home. And I want you to know it wasn't right." That hit harder than anything I could have said. I looked across the room and saw Lucy standing near the door. She'd insisted on coming. She wanted to see how it ended. Her eyes locked with mine. And for a moment, I forgot about fines, bylaws, and laminated code. I just saw my daughter watching her mother stand up to a system that tried to silence her. That was worth everything. Karen, cornered now, began to fold. She tried to explain her real estate listings, said her husband handled them. She denied changing the bylaws, blamed administrative oversight. She said the drone could have belonged to anyone. But it didn't matter. No one was listening anymore. Not because she was yelling, or crying, or angry, but because the illusion had cracked. The performance of power had been stripped away. And underneath it was just another person using fear to get her way. And the community had finally stopped clapping. A vote was called, not to remove her outright. That would require a formal election, but to suspend her authority pending investigation. It passed 15-3. The board announced an emergency reorganization vote for the following month. Until then, Karen's powers were frozen. All active violations issued during her term were suspended for review. I was told on record that my fines would not stand. The coop would stay. Betty, Noodle, Clementine, they would stay. And I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a pillar. When the meeting ended, people lingered. A few neighbors came up to shake my hand. Mr. Nguyen offered to help repaint the coop, if I ever wanted. Mrs. Donnelly asked if I still had eggs to spare. Lucy hugged me and whispered, "You didn't just win, you changed the rules." I didn't reply. I just held her, the way I used to when she was small and everything felt out of my control. Now I realized, control wasn't something you waited for. It was something you reclaimed. One fact at a time. One vote at a time. One neighbor at a time. They didn't know what they'd survived. But I did, and I'd made sure the neighborhood knew it too. The hens were already roosting. Clementine curled into her corner, Noodle tucked under the perch. Betty balanced like royalty on her favorite beam. The same beam Karen once tried to have dismantled. But the only thing dismantled now was her authority. For the first time in months, the air in Crescent Hollow felt still again. Not the brittle kind of stillness that comes before a fight, but the soft, earned quiet that follows when the fight is finally over. She wasn't technically removed yet, but her power was gone. Her motions stalled. Her fines frozen. The HOA board, once filled with nodding heads, began asking questions instead of granting approvals. At the emergency election a few weeks later, she didn't even show up. She sent a typed resignation instead. No apology. No explanation. Just a 3-sentence statement ending with "I wish the community continued success." We didn't need her wishes. We were already rebuilding. Just a neighbor. He invited me to help revise the bylaws properly this time. I said yes. We kept the good stuff: speed bump enforcement, sidewalk repairs, neighborhood watch. But we rewrote the rest. Carefully. Transparently. With input from actual residents. Article 12C was struck, permanently. A new clause. Article 7A was added. Residents may keep up to 4 hens for personal use, provided they do not create unreasonable noise or health risk, and are kept in humane conditions. I wrote the language myself. We also installed a new rule. All HOA changes require 2 public readings and majority homeowner approval. Never again would someone like Karen slip something in the dark. Donnelly brought over her banana bread again, this time with a handwritten apology note and a bag of spinach for the hens. The neighbor kids started tossing grapes over the fence once more. Marcus and Shira helped me plant a new row of sunflowers near the back gate. "Let's make this the greenest coop in the neighborhood," Marcus said. Even Lucy, growing more independent by the day, started joining me again in the mornings. Not every day, but often enough to make me smile. She'd crouch beside Betty and laugh when the hen would try to steal the kale from her fingers before it hit the ground. "This place feels different now," she said once. Like, solid. It did. Not perfect. But honest. Lived in. Ours. As for Karen, she quietly sold her house 3 months later. The listing didn't mention revitalization plans or poultry-free community zones. It just said, "charming home in established neighborhood with lots of character." Funny that. Character was the one thing she tried hardest to erase. One Saturday morning, I walked out with my coffee and noticed something tucked under the edge of the coop door. A note. Typed. Anonymous. But not threatening. "You probably don't know me, but thank you. I watched everything from a distance. I've never spoken up before, but now I think I could. P.S. Your hens are adorable." I smiled. Folded the note. Slipped it into my file folder. Yes. I kept it. Right between the city zoning letter and my handwritten speech from the HOA meeting. Proof that standing up ripples further than you think. Yath. It's easy to forget how fragile peace is. How one person with a clipboard and an ego can bulldoze the little things that make life livable. A garden bed, a porch swing, a chicken coop. But it's also easy to forget how strong community can be when it finally wakes up. You can push people for a while, isolate them, intimidate them, fine them. But eventually truth stacks too high to ignore. And when it tips, it crashes. What she lost was control. She thought I'd back down. That I'd pack up the coop and apologize for existing outside her narrow view of order. But instead, I laid down the law. Literally. Betty laid her 500th egg last week. Lucy made scrambled eggs with basil from the garden. And I stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun cut through the pines and land soft against the coop roof. It glowed. So did I. Because some victories aren't loud. They don't make headlines or come with trophies. Sometimes they're quiet, feathered, earned, and permanent. Have you ever had to stand up to a rule that wasn't really about the rule at all? Let me know in the comments. Because sometimes the smallest fights say the most about who we are. And if you're still watching, hit subscribe. Not every battle has a courtroom, but every neighborhood has a story. And around here, we tell them all.